The air in the Apex Tower's 50th floor conference room wasn't just cold. It was the sharp, sterile chill of money. This was the final meeting for the Skyline project, a $2.5 billion contract to build Dallas's new iconic corporate headquarters. Everything, the panoramic view of the Twilight City, the Italian marble table, the $8,000 a plate catering, screamed exclusivity. Marcus Sterling stood near the glass wall, a silhouette against the city lights. He was 42, a man built with the kind of quiet, understated power that demanded attention without ever raising its voice. His custom-tailored dark gray suit hung perfectly, a statement of effortless, earned success. He wasn't loud. He wasn't networking. He was simply present. Marcus was the founder and CEO of Sterling Design Group, SDG, a firm that had quietly revolutionized urban architecture. He'd learned early that being black in this industry meant your competence had to be undeniable, your grace unshakable. Every line on every blueprint was a fortress against the soft bigotry of low expectations. He was here to listen. SDG had completed the design phase, and now the heavy hitters, the general contractors and financiers, were finalizing the construction bids. At the head of the marble table sat Richard Vance, CEO of Vance Holdings, the primary real estate developer and Marcus's ultimate client. Beside him was Julian Thorne, the towering 60-something head of Thorne Construction, the presumptive winner of the construction contract. Thorne was old money, old systems, and a public-facing confidence that bordered on arrogance. The room held about 20 people, mostly white men in varying shades of corporate armor. The low hum of their conversation about yacht deliveries and weekend golf tournaments was its own kind of gatekeeping. Marcus stayed out of it. He was a creator, not a golfer. He glanced at his watch. His team's technical presentation had been flawless. The design was the best in the room. All that remained was the final sign-off, and he could take his silent victory home. Richard Vance cleared his throat, tapping a gold pen on the polished wood. "All right, folks, let's wrap this up. Julian, tell us why Thorne Construction is still the only real choice for a project of this scale." Julian Thorne leaned back, a smug smile stretching his face. He nodded toward Marcus, a gesture that was patronizing, not inclusive. "Well, Richard, we've reviewed the architectural plans from Sterling Design." Thorne paused on the name, making it sound foreign. "A bold, innovative design, I'll grant you, very contemporary. I'd even say ambitious for a firm of their size." Marcus felt the subtle shift in the room's energy. It wasn't a verbal attack yet, but it was the familiar, soft dismissal, the professional pat on the head. He kept his expression neutral, his hands relaxed by his sides. Decades of this had taught him that the strongest weapon wasn't anger but silence. Thorne continued, his voice dripping with condescension. "Now look, I like a young, hungry firm as much as the next guy, and I'm sure Mr. Sterling here runs a fine, small operation. Maybe he's done some nice condos or a community center. That's admirable work. But $2.5 billion, this is an icon. This requires a legacy name, a proven history. It requires Thorne Construction." He turned fully toward Marcus now, his smile hardening. "Tell me, Marcus, no offense, but who runs the foundation for a 20-story skyscraper? The designer or the contractor who's been pouring concrete since before you were born?" He chuckled, and a few men at the table offered polite, nervous titters. "We appreciate the art, Mr. Sterling, truly. But art is nice. We need structure. We need a company that understands the real challenges of a project this large, not just the aesthetic ones." Marcus took a slow, deep breath, the subtle clenching of his jaw the only outward sign of the effort it took to contain the fire building inside. Ambitious for their size. Nice condos. It was the universal code for, you are talented, but you are still just a black man who got lucky, and this table isn't your place. He saw the eyes of a young, female analyst, Maya, flick toward him with open pity. He didn't want pity. He wanted respect. He wanted the truth to hit them with the force of the $2.5 billion project they were minimizing him on. Thorne reached for a glass of scotch, clearly believing he'd delivered the final, dismissive word. "So, Richard," Thorne said, turning back to the developer, "Thorne Construction can honor the design, but we will need a significant renegotiation of the overall timeline, contingency budget, and frankly, the design fees allocated to the external firms. A project like this requires gravitas, and gravitas, as you know, is expensive." The implicit message was clear. Marcus's firm was the first thing to be cut or marginalized. The billion-dollar lesson was about to begin. Marcus looked at the city, the beautiful, unforgiving grid of lights he'd spent his life trying to shape. He straightened his tie. It wasn't about the money anymore. It was about the dignity he'd earned through years of excellence. He chose his words with the surgical precision of a master architect placing a foundational pillar. He didn't speak to Thorne. He spoke to Richard Vance, the client. "Mr. Vance," Marcus said, his voice calm and clear, cutting through the self-congratulatory air. "I believe there is a fundamental misunderstanding in this room about the project's structure." Thorne turned, a flicker of annoyance crossing his face. "Excuse me, Marcus, I was speaking to the client." Marcus met his gaze, his eyes calm but intensely focused. "I know, but I assure you, Mr. Thorne, the client is listening to me." Thorne laughed, a loud, dismissive bark. "Oh, the architect is now consulting on the financial structure. Go on, son, impress us with your math." Marcus didn't react to the casual racism of son. He just smiled, a thin, deliberate smile that didn't reach his eyes, a smile of controlled power. "I'd be happy to, Mr. Thorne. It's a very simple equation, actually." Marcus didn't wait for Julian Thorne's permission to speak. His voice, a low baritone usually reserved for soothing worried clients or directing massive construction teams, was perfectly level, but it carried an undeniable weight. "Mr. Thorne," Marcus began, looking not at Thorne but directly at Richard Vance, the developer, "you are correct. The foundation of a 20-story building is critical. You also asked who runs the foundation. I'll answer that clearly. I do." A few people shifted uncomfortably. Thorne, recovering quickly, offered a pitying theatrical scoff. "Oh, the architect runs the foundation now. That's precious. We all know design is outsourced. It's the construction firms that hold the real liability, the real risk, and the real power." Marcus leaned forward, bracing his hands gently on the marble table. The simple act gave him an anchoring presence. "Risk is merely uncalculated cost, Mr. Thorne, and liability rests where the financing is allocated." He paused, letting the corporate jargon hang in the air. This wasn't about feelings, it was about capital. "Let's review the deal points," Marcus continued, his eyes now sweeping the room, addressing everyone. "The $2.5 billion Skyline project is a joint venture. Vance Holdings is the primary land and capital partner, and my firm, Sterling Design Group, is not simply a design consultant receiving design fees. SDG is the minority equity holder and the managing partner for all intellectual property and long-term asset value. My fee is not a check for a service, it's a capital stake." The room went silent, not the polite, professional silence from before, but a sudden, sharp, alarmed stillness. The only sound was the faint clatter of distant silverware in the kitchen. Julian Thorne's face, usually ruddy with false confidence, tightened. He looked at Richard Vance, whose expression had become a mask of professional discomfort. "Richard, what is he talking about?" Thorne demanded, his voice losing its smooth condescension and taking on a rough, demanding edge. "Equity holder. This kid owns a piece of the Skyline project." Vance cleared his throat, fiddling with his gold pen. "Julian, it was in the initial prospectus. A 12% stake was allocated to SDG to ensure the architectural integrity and long-term vision was protected. It was a condition of our primary funding from the Municipal Bond Coalition. Thorne stood up abruptly, knocking his chair back a foot. 12%. 12% of a $2.5 billion deal is $300 million. You gave this man a $300 million stake, an equity position, to draw some blueprints. He couldn't hide the contempt, the disbelief that a black man in his early 40s, who he had just publicly dismissed as a maker of nice condos, could be his financial superior in the room. Marcus remained seated, a picture of unflappable poise. He watched Thorne's reaction, the slow-motion erosion of respect, and felt a deep, familiar weariness. It's cool. I've been here before. He had to be twice as good to get half the recognition, and even when he had the numbers on the board, they still had to be translated into a language they understood, the language of money, before his competence was validated. Thorne turned to Marcus, his hands gripping the edge of the table. Look, Sterling, let's cut the high-minded talk. We all know what's happening here. Richard gave you a diversity quota handout, a substantial, frankly ludicrous handout to secure public funding. That doesn't make you a partner, it makes you a political requirement. The insult, delivered in a clear, angry voice, was heard by every person in the room. The young analyst, Maya, gasped softly. The other executives looked down at their documents, embarrassed but refusing to intervene. The air was electric with tension, the shame of prejudice exposed, not by a victim's shout but by an aggressor's calculated public error. Marcus felt the heat rise slightly on his neck, but he consciously forced his shoulders to relax, his exhale to lengthen. He drew on a lifetime of moments like this. The college professor who doubted his thesis, the bank manager who questioned his collateral, the subtle avoidance in a crowded elevator. Every slight was a brick in the foundation of his unshakable calm dignity. He wouldn't give this man the satisfaction of anger. Don't react, respond. The thought was a silent mantra, don't let his noise drown your facts. He finally looked Thorne directly in the eye, not with aggression, but with a profound, almost philosophical sadness. Mr. Thorne, I came to this meeting prepared to work with you, Marcus said, his voice dropping slightly, forcing Thorne to listen closely. My firm's 12% equity was earned through a $5 million design investment, the acquisition of 3 critical patents, and a guaranteed risk transfer clause that took primary liability for any foundational design failure off Vance Holdings' books. Marcus let that fact sink in. He wasn't a handout, he was the insurance policy. Furthermore, as an equity partner, Marcus continued, his words delivered with surgical precision, the final selection of the general contractor, the one who will be working directly with the design, financing, and liability requirements, requires a majority vote of the primary stakeholders. Since Vance Holdings holds 60% and the municipal group holds 28%, my 12% stake gives me, effectively, the swing vote. He leaned back slowly, the movement smooth and deliberate. The weight of his 12% had just landed on the table, heavier than Thorne's entire 60 years of legacy. So, Mr. Thorne, Marcus finished, the quiet triumph echoing in the room. You may be right. Maybe I don't look like the kind of person who belongs at this table, but the reality is I don't just belong here. As the swing vote, I am currently the only one who can decide whether Thorne Construction gets this contract or not. We're not renegotiating my fees, we're discussing your suitability. And based on your assessment of my firm's size and the professional gravitas you've displayed here tonight, I have serious concerns. The room was absolutely silent. Julian Thorne's face was a study in shock, realization, and dawning terror. He had just publicly humiliated the man who held his entire future in his hand. Marcus had used silence to draw out the prejudice, and intelligence to deliver the first, perfect counterpunch. The game had just changed. The silence that followed Marcus Sterling's revelation wasn't merely the absence of sound. It was a physical force, pressing down on the mahogany table, suffocating the self-assurance of the room's elite. It was the sound of a truth universally denied being suddenly, violently acknowledged. Julian Thorne, the antagonist, stood frozen, his mouth slightly open, the arrogance draining from his face like air from a punctured tire. The color that had left him moments ago now rushed back, a blotchy red of humiliation and panic. His entire world, decades of assumed supremacy, had just been rendered dependent on the man he had called son. Marcus remained still, his hands resting on the cool marble. He didn't need to speak. Every micro-emotion in the room was his ally now. He was the eye of the storm. You ever been in a room where folks doubted you? He didn't just feel their doubt. He felt their sudden, frantic scramble to recalculate his worth. That silence, you could feel it in your bones. It was the sound of their internal spreadsheets crashing. The other executives, who had nervously chuckled at Thorne's disrespect, now stared fixedly at their legal pads. They were witnesses, trapped by their complicity. They hadn't insulted Marcus, but their silence had endorsed Thorne's. Now, Marcus's silence judged them. He watched Thorne, observing the classic arc of an entitled man facing consequence. Denial, fury, and finally, a pitiful attempt at recovery. "Richard," Thorne barked, turning to the developer. "This is unprofessional. You let him leverage a technicality to hold the entire project hostage. My firm is $50 million into the pre-bid stage. You can't let a junior partner dictate terms to Thorne Construction." Richard Vance, equally exposed, wrung his hands. "Julian, it's not a technicality. It was a primary funding requirement. Sterling Design Group holds the IP. Marcus, Mr. Sterling, is acting entirely within his rights as an equity partner." Vance's shift from Marcus to Mr. Sterling was the most telling sound of all. Marcus finally spoke, his voice quiet, almost conversational, forcing them to lean in and listen to the man they had dismissed. "I'm not holding anything hostage, Mr. Thorne," Marcus said. "I am assessing suitability. As the managing partner for the architectural and long-term asset integrity, I have a fiduciary duty to ensure that the contractor shares the project's vision and values. Your behavior tonight, sir, suggests neither." Thorne took a halting step back, stumbling slightly against his chair. He had to pivot, and quickly. The arrogance melted into forced, sickening cordiality. "Mr. Sterling, Marcus, look, I apologize," Thorne stammered, the words forced and clunky. "It's late. Tensions are high. I misspoke. I clearly misjudged your role here. I meant nothing personal. We all get a little tired, right? We're all professionals." The apology was hollow, delivered not out of remorse, but pure, naked fear of loss. It was a request for forgiveness from a man who had not earned the right to ask. Marcus didn't move. He didn't accept the apology. He didn't reject it. He simply let it float in the air, exposed for what it was, a desperate transactional attempt to reclaim $2.5 billion. "I appreciate your clarification, Mr. Thorne," Marcus replied. "But a misjudgment on a partner's role and a professional's capabilities is a massive operational risk. What else have you misjudged in your bid?" The crowd, which was still holding its collective breath, saw the cold, calculated logic. Marcus wasn't demanding an emotional apology. He was using Thorne's prejudice as evidence of incompetence. Julian Thorne's attempts at control shattered. He became aggressive again, driven by a life spent never having to truly apologize. "Come on, you're going to kill this contract over a single, stupid comment, over political correctness. You'll ruin yourself too. The market will see this as instability." Marcus fixed him with a stare of utter calm. "You're right, I don't look like I belong, but sometimes looks lie." He reached into the inner pocket of his coat and pulled out a small, metallic object, a keycard and ID badge. It wasn't the badge of an architect. It was thick, black, and had the corporate logo of Vance Holdings clearly visible, but with a color band that denoted the absolute highest level of access. He didn't need to flash it wildly. He simply laid it on the table next to his hands. The motion was quiet, almost soundless, but it landed with the resonance of a gavel. My first project out of graduate school was designing the seismic infrastructure for the new Texas high-speed rail, Marcus said, his voice a steady hum. My second was consulting on the foundation stability for the Bank of America headquarters here in Dallas. My firm, SDG, has a risk profile that is 3 standard deviations below the national average. I didn't get 12% equity because of a handout, Mr. Thorne. I got it because I am the safest bet in this room. He let the implication sink in. Thorne, by contrast, was the risk. Thorne was visibly sweating now. He glanced at the badge, then back at Marcus, unable to reconcile the man he saw with the authority he now represented. The weight of Marcus's silent strength had completely crushed Thorne's ability to act professionally. This wasn't about the contract anymore. It was about the dignity Marcus was silently reclaiming, piece by hard-earned piece. The entire scene, recorded by a few discreet phones, was a masterclass in controlled response, a quiet demonstration of power that was infinitely more devastating than any retaliatory shout. Marcus was allowing the world to watch Julian Thorne destroy himself. Julian Thorne's face was now pale, his entire demeanor shifting from master to supplicant. He realized that the contempt he just displayed wasn't just morally bankrupt, it was financially suicidal. He tried a new tactic, groveling. He stepped back from the table and made a sweeping gesture of submission. "Mr. Sterling, please, I am deeply sorry. My comments were out of line, wholly unprofessional, and they do not reflect the values of Thorne Construction. I assure you we respect all our partners. Please, let's have a private conversation. Let's salvage this. We can discuss." Marcus cut him off, not with a loud voice, but with the simple, devastating act of ignoring the apology. "The suitability assessment is still pending, Mr. Thorne, and it's not a private conversation." Marcus looked deliberately at the executives who had averted their gaze. "It's a matter of public record, and more importantly, a matter of accountability to the $2.5 billion project's investors and the city of Dallas." Marcus's calm was a suffocating blanket. It was the weight of silence speaking volumes, confirming his superiority in every measurable way, financial, moral, and professional. He noticed Maya, the young analyst, slowly, subtly placing her phone on the table. The screen was black, but the camera was positioned perfectly. Marcus gave her the faintest nod, a silent acknowledgement that her quiet courage to document the scene was seen and appreciated. Phones were recording, eyes were watching, whispers were about to spread, but for now the room was held captive by its own discomfort. The tension wasn't just in the silence. It was in the air pressure, the stillness of bodies afraid to move, the sound of labored breathing. Marcus could hear the faint, sharp intake of breath as Thorne realized his fate was being sealed in this sterile room. Micro-emotion check. Marcus ran a fingertip along the edge of the marble table, feeling the cool, polished stone. The act was a grounding exercise. His inner world was turbulent, a familiar current of disappointment and righteous frustration. But externally, he was granite. He remembered his grandfather's words. "They can't take your calm unless you hand it over." He stood up slowly, deliberately, reclaiming the height and physical authority he had momentarily relinquished. "Let's clarify something, Mr. Thorne," Marcus said, his voice measured. "When you decided to dismiss my firm, you weren't assessing my art. You were assessing me. You judged my capacity to execute a $2.5 billion contract based on assumptions that have nothing to do with architecture, risk analysis, or financial models." He paused, letting the statement, "Prejudice is a failure of logic," resonate. "That failure of judgment, Mr. Thorne, is unacceptable in a partner of this magnitude," Marcus continued. "Because if you can so casually misjudge the integrity of a person you are professionally dependent upon, how can I trust your judgment on concrete stress tolerances, or the integrity of the project timeline? The truth is, my dignity is the foundation of my business, and you just tried to walk all over it." Julian Thorne was reduced to pleading. "Mr. Sterling, I'll match your stake. I'll make you an official majority contractor partner. We'll make a donation. We'll start a scholarship in your name. Anything. Just don't let this cost me the bid." This desperate offer was the final, pathetic affirmation of Marcus's power. Thorne was offering to buy back the respect he'd just thrown away. Marcus turned his gaze toward Richard Vance, the developer, forcing him to take ownership of the situation. "Richard, I suggest we adjourn this meeting for the evening. Thorne Construction has clearly demonstrated a lack of professional control and judgment that compromises my firm's fiduciary responsibility to the overall project. I need time to assess the full impact of Mr. Thorne's behavior on the confidence of my investors and my team." Vance nodded immediately, relieved to have a way out. "Yes, absolutely, Julian, that's enough. We're done for the night." Marcus didn't offer a handshake. He didn't gloat. He picked up his badge, his movement economical and graceful. As he turned to leave, he paused at the door, delivering the final, quiet blow that sealed Thorne's fate. He spoke softly, but the acoustics of the marble room carried the words to every corner. "Mr. Thorne, you mentioned that a skyscraper requires a legacy name, a proven history. I agree," Marcus said, turning just his head, his profile sharp against the cityscape. "But sometimes a legacy isn't about how long you've been in business, it's about how clean your business is. My father used to tell me, respect ain't given, it's earned. You just spent 60 years trying to buy it. I earned my way in here." He looked at Thorne's horrified, defeated expression. "I will be notifying my primary investors, including the Municipal Bond Coalition, about the results of tonight's contractor suitability assessment tomorrow morning," Marcus concluded. "Until then, consider this meeting a professional pause." Then, with an almost imperceptible nod to Maya, the young analyst Marcus Sterling walked out. The heavy, sound-dampening door closed behind him with a soft thud. The noise that Marcus's exit created was immense. The room immediately exploded into whispers, questions, and the sound of Julian Thorne scrambling to beg Richard Vance for intervention. Marcus was gone, but the immense, crushing weight of his silent strength remained, forcing everyone left behind to face the consequences of their silence and one man's prejudice. He hadn't demanded justice. He had simply set the process in motion by standing tall. The boardroom, 5 minutes after Marcus's exit. The heavy door had barely clicked shut behind Marcus Sterling when the fragile composure of the room dissolved. The hum of conversation was low and frenetic, like bees swarming a suddenly destroyed hive. Julian Thorne was red-faced, vibrating with a mixture of disbelief and genuine, paralyzing fear. He was packing the space where Marcus had just stood, appealing desperately to Richard Vance. "Richard, you have to fix this. You can't let him do this. 12%, that's a block. You know what this means. If he votes against me, the Municipal Bond Group, the MBC, will side with the IP holder. My bid is dead. Years of planning, 50 million in pre-bid. Gone." Richard Vance, the developer, looked ill. He was realizing far too late that he had fundamentally misread the architecture of the deal and the architect himself. "Julian, calm down. We have an out. We just need to replace his firm with a smaller, more compliant minority partner. We'll pay the cancellation fee." "No, you won't," a new voice cut in, sharp and final. It was Maya, the young analyst, still holding her phone. She looked tiny next to the panicked, wealthy men, but her voice was steady. She wasn't looking at Thorne. She was looking at the silent executives. Mr. Sterling didn't just walk out. He just sent a company-wide memo, and he included all primary stakeholders, including the Municipal Bond Coalition's Oversight Board, Maya stated, her fingers flying over her phone screen. She tapped a button, and the massive 80-inch presentation screen, moments ago displaying Thorne Construction's glossy proposal, switched to a simple black-and-white memo. The headline was stark. Subject: urgent. Notice of fiduciary review and suspension of contractor bid acceptance. The text, written in Marcus's clear, uncompromising style, was projected for everyone to see. To all stakeholders of the Skyline project. Due to a critical breakdown in professional conduct and a demonstrated failure of objective judgment by a lead bidder during the final suitability assessment, Sterling Design Group, as the managing IP and 12% equity partner, has exercised its contractual right to invoke Clause 4.1b, Partner Discretionary Suspension. This clause mandates the immediate suspension of the final contract award pending a full, independent audit of the bidder's integrity, risk assessment protocols, and internal diversity standards. The incident was recorded and documented. A full report will be presented to the Board of Vance Holdings and the MBC Oversight Committee by 8:00 a.m. tomorrow. The Skyline project is too important for foundational decisions to be made on grounds of bias or professional incompetence. Marcus Sterling, CEO, Sterling Design Group, Managing Partner, Skyline Project. The screen became the focal point of a seismic shock. Thorne's betrayal of respect was now an official, documented failure of risk management. "Oh God," one of the finance directors whispered, clutching his chest. He didn't need to shout, he just signed the death certificate. Julian Thorne read the words, his eyes wide, his hands trembling, recorded and documented. He looked wildly at Maya, then at the other executives, desperately searching for denial. "You can't do this. This is restraint of trade. I'll sue him. I'll ruin his little firm." Thorne shrieked, his professional facade completely gone, replaced by a desperate, ugly rage. Richard Vance stepped in, his voice low and firm, signaling that he had finally understood the truth of the power dynamic. "Julian, stop. This is a formal, contractual move. You played right into his hands. Funny thing about respect, you don't need to demand it when you already earned it." Marcus wasn't asking for an apology. He was gathering evidence for his audit. The crowd energy shifted. The uncomfortable silence of complicity was replaced by the uncomfortable shock of exposure. Those who had tittered at Thorne's jokes now distanced themselves with frantic, silent motions, grabbing their briefcases and heading for the door. They didn't want to be associated with a public record of professional bias. Just as Thorne was collapsing into a chair, his face a picture of ruin, the door opened again. Not Marcus, but Ms. Chen, Vance Holdings' head of security, entered. She was a woman known for her efficiency and zero tolerance. She walked directly to Julian Thorne, carrying a sleek black tablet. "Mr. Thorne, I have just received a directive from Mr. Vance's office," she said, her voice devoid of emotion. "Effective immediately, you are barred from the Apex Tower premises. Your keycard access has been revoked, and I need to collect this." She tapped the screen, and the image of Thorne's face appeared, crossed out with a bold red X. The digital evidence was irrefutable. Thorne stared at the screen, stuttering. "BB barred. I'm the lead bidder. I'm Julian Thorne." "You were the lead bidder," Ms. Chen corrected gently, extending her hand. "Now, you are a security risk under professional audit by an equity partner. You are directed to gather your personal effects and exit the building immediately. Any continued presence will be treated as trespassing." The shock was unfolding slowly, meticulously. The prejudice was an emotional explosion. The justice was a cold, digital, corporate dismantling. Julian Thorne, reduced to a common trespasser, looked at the remaining executives, his peers, his friends. But they avoided his gaze, eyes focused on their phones, likely reading the memo or checking the stock prices of Thorne Construction, which were already wavering. Marcus had not sought vengeance, he had sought accountability, and he had received it with the cold, hard efficiency of the digital age. He had walked away calmly, his dignity intact. He left behind a blueprint of consequences that was now being executed with devastating precision. His truth had walked into the room, and it was wearing a digital access badge and holding a $300 million stake. Outside the 50th floor conference room, Marcus walked with a deliberate, even stride toward the elevator bank. He felt the familiar, cold burn of adrenaline subsiding, replaced by the quiet, heavy satisfaction of a task executed with precision. He hadn't sought revenge, he'd sought correction. As he rode the elevator down, looking out at the glittering grid of Dallas, he allowed a moment of reflection. Funny thing about respect, you don't need to demand it when you already earned it. He realized that the greatest power wasn't the 12% equity. It was the ability to remain completely calm while someone else was losing everything, to stand in the fire without flinching. That was the real strength. Meanwhile, back in the conference room, the fallout was becoming a public, digital catastrophe. Julian Thorne was being escorted out by Ms. Chen and a silent, towering security guard. The few remaining executives, desperate to distance themselves, were already confirming the story to their own corporate counsel. But the real reckoning was happening online. Maya, the young analyst, had not only documented the initial humiliation, but she had also captured the moment Marcus projected the suspension memo onto the screen. She didn't upload the video to a corporate channel. She sent a secure message to a well-known financial blogger who specialized in accountability stories. Within 10 minutes of Marcus leaving the building, the short video clip was live on X, formerly Twitter, under the hashtag #BillionDollarDignity. The clip was stark. Julian Thorne, red-faced, bellowing about political correctness, followed by the appearance of Marcus's calm, authoritative memo on the screen. The narration on the post was simple. When the CEO of Thorne Construction mocked the black architect's firm as too small, he didn't realize the architect had the 12% swing vote and was about to audit his entire company. The cost of disrespect: a $2.5 billion contract. The collective energy outside the room, the entire corporate world of Dallas, shifted instantaneously. Thorne Construction stock took an immediate, noticeable dip. The truth traveled at the speed of light. Phones across the Apex Tower lobby, in other firms' offices, and in the hands of the Municipal Bond Coalition members lit up with the news. Those who had mocked started to look uneasy. An executive from Thorne Construction's legal team, rushing to the tower, watched the video on his phone and saw his boss's career implode in 30 seconds of shaky footage. He knew a lawsuit was pointless. Marcus had used their own contract against them, leveraging a moral failure into a legal and financial risk assessment. Inside the tower, Richard Vance, the primary developer, was trying to manage the unmanageable. He knew Marcus hadn't acted out of petty vengeance. He had acted with unquestionable professional integrity. Vance, now facing potential investor revolt, knew he had to support Marcus. Vance found Marcus waiting patiently in the lobby for his car. "Mr. Sterling," Vance said, rushing over, his tie loosened, his voice strained. "Marcus, I want you to know I had no idea Julian would behave like that. It's indefensible. You have my full, unequivocal support. Whatever your firm needs for this audit, you have it." Marcus looked at Vance, his face betraying no emotion. "Thank you, Richard, that's noted. My firm requires two things. First, a complete, transparent review of Thorne Construction's bid and ethical history. Second, a guarantee that this company, Vance Holdings, understands that integrity is not an optional annex to a contract. It's the contract." Vance nodded grimly. "Consider it guaranteed. We'll issue a statement supporting your actions immediately. Julian Thorne is finished with the Skyline project." Justice through truth, not vengeance, was unfolding in real time. Marcus didn't need to ask for Julian's job or personal ruin. He simply pulled the thread of truth, and the entire fabric of Thorne's arrogant career began to unravel. The whole room, the whole city knew. They just didn't know how to look him in the eye anymore. The lesson was clear. The black architect didn't get his power from a handout or an anomaly. He got it from being undeniably competent, and he used his status to enforce a standard of dignity that the wealthy elite had conveniently forgotten. Marcus turned to exit the lobby, stepping out into the cool Texas night air. His phone vibrated, an email notification. It was from Maya, the analyst. It contained a simple, one-line message. "Thank you for showing us how it's supposed to be done. We saw the truth tonight." Marcus paused for a beat on the pavement. The injustice he'd faced was heavy, but the impact of his controlled response, the silent billion-dollar lesson, was profound. He had not just saved a contract. He had sent a powerful message to every young professional watching. Excellence is your greatest weapon, and dignity is your final shield. Marcus Sterling settled into the back seat of his town car, the city lights blurring into streaks of gold and neon as they accelerated away from the apex tower. He hadn't just left a meeting. He had left a bomb ticking, a bomb made not of explosives, but of truth and consequences. His personal assistant, tuning into the financial news over the car's Bluetooth, spoke first. "Mr. Sterling, the initial reports are already circulating. Thorne Construction stock is down 4% in after-hours trading. CNBC is running a headline about a major contract disruption due to an internal ethics review." Marcus closed his eyes, leaning his head back against the leather seat. This wasn't vindication. It was the mechanism of justice grinding into gear. He hadn't needed to raise his voice or lift a finger in anger. The system, the corporate, high-stakes system, was now punishing Julian Thorne for the sin of bringing prejudice into a professional environment. He thought of the look on Thorne's face, the shock, the fear, the sudden, terrible realization that his entire identity was built on a foundation that Marcus had just proven was unsound. Meanwhile, back inside the Apex Tower, the story was traveling faster than any press release. Maya's clip, posted discreetly but strategically, had hit the critical mass of viral engagement. It was being shared across LinkedIn, the corporate circuit's true social media, with ruthless commentary. The initial viewers, mostly low-level analysts and young professionals, were the first wave of the collective awakening. They didn't see a rich man getting fired. They saw dignity winning against entitlement. Comments were flying. "Yo, this is wild. Architect pulled out the 12% stake. Never disrespect the quiet ones. Thorne Construction just got audited by the guy they mocked. Billion-dollar lesson." The silence in that room, that's the sound of white-collar accountability. Love it. The truth was infecting the corporate atmosphere like a necessary, cleansing fever. Richard Vance, the developer, was now on damage control. He was meeting with his legal team, preparing the official statement that would cut all ties with Thorne Construction. "We have to be clear," Vance insisted, his voice heavy with regret. "Mr. Sterling's actions saved us. He turned a potential corporate liability, Thorne's obvious bias, into a clear ethical action. We support his immediate and full audit." Vance knew that siding with Marcus Sterling wasn't just morally correct. It was the only financially safe move. Marcus's quiet strength had forced the hand of the powerful. Marcus, however, was focused on the next step, the actual audit. The viral tide was the event, but the audit was the justice. The following morning, Marcus walked back into the Apex Tower, this time not for a meeting, but for an official inspection. He was flanked not by his design team, but by 3 senior partners from a prestigious forensic accounting firm. He was wearing the same suit, the same air of calm competence, but now the room treated him differently. He was met by a nervous Richard Vance, who looked like he hadn't slept. "Marcus, the team is set up," Vance said, ushering him into a secure annex. "We've given your auditors full access to the internal communications and bidding files for Thorne Construction. It's extensive." Marcus nodded. "Thank you, Richard. My goal is not to punish an individual but to ensure the integrity of the Skyline project, and integrity requires transparency." He knew that Julian Thorne's entire career was about to be laid bare. The consequences of that one moment of disrespect were now unfolding on a scale far beyond the $2.5 billion project. The humiliation in the conference room was a personal error. The audit was a corporate execution. Marcus sat down, opened his briefcase, and started the systematic, quiet process of professional justice. He felt the weight of the city on his shoulders, but also the weight of every person who had ever been underestimated or dismissed. He was not just building a skyscraper, he was building a higher standard of respect. He glanced at the news feed on his monitor. The billion-dollar dignity hashtag was still trending. The headline beneath it read, "Thorne Construction loses contract, faces ethics probe. Sources say prejudice played a key role." The collective awakening had solidified into a public record of shame and accountability. Justice through truth was complete. Days later, the initial shock had settled into a quiet, profound certainty. Julian Thorne was professionally ruined. The audit, initiated by Marcus Sterling's firm, unearthed not just ethical lapses but patterns of questionable billing and corner-cutting on past projects. All professional risks Thorne had been taking for years, believing his legacy name provided an unbreakable shield. The exposure was total. Julian Thorne became a digital ghost. His image, once synonymous with Dallas real estate power, was now a meme of arrogance meeting consequence. He hadn't been fired. He had been dismantled by the very contract he had sought to marginalize. Marcus, meanwhile, worked meticulously, calmly installing a new, vetted general contractor whose primary qualification was not legacy, but a clean track record and a public statement of commitment to the dignity of all partners. The contrast between the two men was the final, devastating act of the reckoning. Thorne was a whirlwind of rage, denial, and pathetic public attempts to blame cancel culture. Marcus was an island of calm, his every action a testament to his original premise, that prejudice is a failure of logic, and logic always wins. Marcus was now the de facto face of the Skyline project, his face replacing Thorne in every official document and press release. His quiet competence was no longer a personal shield, but a corporate standard. He stood with Richard Vance for the official press conference announcing the new partnership and the reason for the original suspension. Marcus's statement was brief, powerful, and utterly devoid of malice. "The Skyline project is about building a monument to the future of Dallas," Marcus stated into a wall of cameras. "And the foundation of any great future must be integrity and mutual respect. When those standards are compromised, we have a professional duty to course correct." This was never personal. This was about accountability to $2.5 billion and the thousands of jobs it represents. He didn't mention Thorne by name. He didn't need to. The truth had already traveled. Later that evening, Marcus was alone in his private office, overlooking the very spot where the Apex Tower would soon rise. He wasn't celebrating. He felt a deep, complex mix of exhaustion and satisfaction. This victory hadn't been joyous. It had been necessary. He pulled up the viral video again. The moment Julian Thorne called him son, the laughter, the dismissive wave of the hand. He watched his own measured response. The slow, deliberate movement, the calm gaze, the choice of silence over rage. He realized the victory wasn't the contract. It was the control he maintained. He had walked into that room prepared not just with a design, but with a strategy to defend his dignity, knowing that his competence was his currency and his composure was his shield. He remembered the looks on the faces of the other executives, the collective, dawning realization that they had sat silent, lending credence to a moment of blatant disrespect. The whole room knew. They just didn't know how to look him in the eye anymore. That was the true reckoning. It wasn't just about Thorne's financial loss. It was about the moral tax collected on every witness who failed to speak up. Marcus had not ruined their careers, but he had ruined their comfortable indifference. They now had a choice: continue to tolerate casual prejudice, or join the new standard of respect that Marcus Sterling had quietly but firmly set. The tension released, not in a shout but in a profound exhale. Justice had been served, not through vengeance, but through the calm, uncompromising enforcement of truth. Marcus had shown them that sometimes the only way to demand your worth is to prove it, and then use the resulting power to protect the integrity of the whole system. His phone buzzed one last time. It was a message from Maya, the young analyst, whose quiet documentation had started the fire. She simply sent him a picture of a newly redesigned corporate banner for Vance Holdings. Below the logo, a new line had been added to their core values. Integrity is the foundation. Respect is the blueprint. Marcus smiled faintly. The lesson was learned. The foundation was set. Marcus's high-rise apartment, late evening. Rain softly falling against the huge glass window. The noise of the city had faded into a soft, ambient hum. The chaos of the apex tower, the frantic phone calls, the flashing cameras, the ruined career of Julian Thorne, now felt distant, like a storm that had passed far out to sea. Marcus Sterling stood alone by the vast window of his apartment. He held a glass of dark amber liquid, a quiet appreciation for the night and the justice served. The rain on the glass mirrored the blurring lines between the city's ambition and its ugly realities. He wasn't gloating. There was no exhilaration. Instead, there was a deep, complex sense of peace mixed with the familiar, heavy weariness of a battle that should never have had to be fought. He reflected on the phrase, "The black architect taught them a billion-dollar lesson in dignity and silence." It wasn't just them he taught, it was himself. He was reminded that true strength wasn't the ability to retaliate, but the capacity to absorb the blow and respond with the calm authority of competence. You ever been in a room where folks doubted you? He had been in those rooms his whole life. Every contract, every meeting, every success had been preceded by a moment of subtle doubt, a soft dismissal that questioned his right to be there. The truth was, the moment Julian Thorne had called him son, Marcus felt that familiar, hot rush of indignation. But he had learned to process that heat into a cold, tactical decision. Anger would have been personal. Accountability was professional. Anger would have made him lose the swing vote. Calm strength had used the swing vote to enforce a higher moral standard. He looked at his reflection in the dark glass, a man who had just dismantled an empire without raising his voice. He remembered his grandfather's words echoing across generations. "You gotta be so good, son, that when they try to dismiss you, they look like fools to the whole world. Don't fight them with your hands, fight them with your facts." And that's what he had done. He hadn't sought to wound Thorne, he had sought to heal the system by removing a contaminant. The shame Thorne felt was his own, born of his prejudice, not Marcus's vengeance. Marcus took a slow, deliberate sip of his drink. He wasn't defined by the insult, but by the response. The dignity he'd shown was for every black professional who had to carry the weight of representation and the burden of proof. He was the man who had been doubted, dismissed, and humiliated. And he was also the man who had the intelligence, the status, and the grace to turn that moment of disrespect into a powerful, permanent change. He allowed himself a moment of quiet satisfaction. The battle was won, not with aggression but with dignity. Marcus moved away from the window, turning to address the unseen listener, the audience, as a trusted storyteller sharing life wisdom. His voice was calm, deep, and reflective, like the low, gentle notes of a piano in the silence of the night. They say that quiet strength is the hardest kind to find. That silence, you could feel it in your bones, right? The moment he realized the man he thought was nobody actually held the keys to his kingdom. We all carry moments like that. Moments where you're sized up and found wanting, not because of your work, but because of who you are. Maybe you've been in that room. Maybe you felt that heavy, suffocating weight of being underestimated. But here's the lesson that Julian Thorne paid $2.5 billion to learn. Your worth is never up for negotiation. You don't have to beg for a seat at the table when you've already built the entire room. Marcus Sterling didn't win by shouting. He won by having a foundation so solid in his business, his intellect, and his character, that when the moment came, the truth spoke for him. He walked away calm, leaving behind a blueprint for a better way to operate, a way where respect is the prerequisite for business and dignity is the bottom line. His story isn't about revenge. It's about the profound power of patience and poise when you know, deep down, exactly who you are and what you've accomplished. When you choose grace over aggression, you force the world to face its own failings, not yours. Some battles are won without raising your voice, only standing tall. Hit like if you believe in quiet strength. Subscribe for more stories about justice, wisdom, and the quiet power of standing tall.